Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and lovely guests, and fine gentlemen guests here. You may remember some dates in history where things changed after them, like December 7th, 1941, the day the Japanese Imperial Navy bombed Pearl Harbor, the day that the United States decided to enter World War II. The response to that day changed the world. Another day, November 22nd, 1963, the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was murdered in the streets of Dallas. It changed history. The United States' response, an orderly progression of power, succession of power. How about November 11th, 2001? Once again, the United States was attacked. Once again, they responded, and once again, history was changed. And all of these are dates that you may remember either from history books or from your life. But let me bring you to another date. This one also in November, the 26th, 1966. You may think, what day is that? What happened to change the world on that day? Well, I don't blame you for not knowing, because it was my world that changed. It was a very personal change for me and for my family. It was Thanksgiving Day, 1966. Our family was privileged to use a mountain cabin that belonged to a friend of my father's, and so we went up there. Now let me tell you a little bit about my father. He was born in 1920 in Los Angeles. Poor family. My grandfather delivered goods to stores his entire life. When he was 10 years old, my father was stricken with polio. He called himself a cripple. That's not the PC word. Today, we use words like disabled or handicapped or things like that. But he called himself crippled because one leg didn't work at all. There were no muscles left in it as a result of the polio. And he used a brace on that leg so that he could walk with the aid of a cane. The other leg was weakened, as were muscles throughout his body. But he lived a normal life, as you would think, with the exception of he wasn't able to get around. So he called himself a cripple. But he was never crippled in his mind. He was never crippled in his response to the world. His response to his adversity was to press on. And I hope that's the theme of my life, and perhaps the theme of yours, to press on. Well, let me take you back to the cabin in the mountains on Thanksgiving Day. In the cabin, in the kitchen, there was, on one end, what you might call a homemade dinette that would seat 12. It was a beautiful, wonderful place. Then a sink board, a sink, a water heater, and an old cast iron wood stove. Beautiful cast iron wood stove. But that water heater, every time somebody would leave the cabin, would turn off the pilot, and so the next person coming would have to turn it on and light it. And the lighting of a pilot is way down here, as you might know from a water heater. Well, I was 13 years old. My father was not the kind of person who said to his wife, go light the pilot, so he was going to do it himself. Now, when you don't have any muscles in your legs, it's hard to squat down. What my father did was leaned on that cast iron stove and start to work his way down, letting that leg kind of act as a triangle as he moved down to get on the ground. And at some point, the leg slipped. And where it stopped was underneath the water heater. The legs of the water heater held it about that far off the ground, and it twisted. It twisted his ankle, it twisted his knee, it twisted the brace that held the leg, and the ligaments in his knee let go because something had to give. And so the ligaments in my father's knee let go, and he was in pain. I could tell this by his verbal response to the fall. I heard slip, clunk, and then, oh God, the pain. Now, my father wasn't one who said, oh God, lightly. He would say it in worship. He would say it, well, that was about the only time I ever heard him say it, in worship, and that day in pain. His pain was so great. It was a day that would mark a change in my father's life, and me at 13 years old, being a young boy who thought he knew everything, a young boy whose world centered on his father, a young boy who was arrogant to a degree, who was self-possessed to a degree. Suddenly, my world was crushed because my father, the rock of my life, was lying on the floor in pain, crying out to God, and not a thing I could do about it. How did I react? I did not react as the United States reacted when Pearl Harbor was bombed. I went and I stowed away. I hid away. And I got on my knees. And I prostrated myself. And I said, oh God, what's going to happen to me? What is going to happen to my dad? He's still crying in the kitchen. And I'm not there to help him because I don't know what to do. Will you tell me what to do? And the great God that made this universe with his hand and with his command of his voice reached down in this self-righteous little 13-year-old's heart and cradled it in his hand and spoke words to me that my mind could hear, my soul could hear and understand clearly. He said, don't worry, everything will be okay. Well, the world changed that day. My father could no longer walk with a cane and brace very well. He now relied mostly on the wheelchair. He could get up and go to the bathroom from the bed or walk to the table, but he could no longer walk all around. But this young man learned something that day. I learned that my dad is not God. My dad is not the rock. He's a human being, and life will go on. And I hope your trials and tribulations, you'll learn similar things.